So we're just going to record this part. Well, actually, you know what? I'm going to pause the recording.
So when we talk about storytelling with data, it's a pretty big subject, and whole books have been written on the subject and websites devoted to the content. So tonight I'm just going to lightly touch on each of these areas, but I'm going to focus mainly on understanding the context because I think this is where technologists make the greatest mistake. So I think what we all want to do is, as a BI developer, you want to avoid creating dead reports. You spend all this time creating a report that no one uses or finds very little value in. And you're thinking to yourself, well, what went wrong? You followed all the correct technical project steps. You gathered the requirements. Met with the sponsor, went through the use cases. You connected to all the data sources. You reviewed the data. You went through and cleaned up and transformed. You built models. You scheduled refreshes. You created your DAX functions. Those all look solid. And then you secured it, and then you published it and presented it. Well, after some time, you go and check your report usage metrics, and you're hoping to see really high metrics. And you're thinking, all right, congratulations, I did it. And then you check your views per day, and no one's using the report. So essentially what you've done is created a dead report. And some of you might be thinking, well, if you're using usage metrics as the success factor, then hey, I'm doing pretty well, right? But are you really? Are people really using your report? If your audience wants access to the chart data source without reviewing your charts that you created, maybe time to ask, what questions are they trying to answer with the data? What's the story that they're trying to discover? And perhaps maybe your reports and visualizations are not providing that right information.
It's
So
even worse. Like they could be subscribing to the report, so they might be looking at it like once in the morning, but just out of habit, or maybe the subscription is modifying your view statistics.
correct. So in the end, you basically created perhaps an expensive data interface, and users are just creating their own visualizations. And later on, they may just choose to skip your report and create a separate data connection altogether. So that's no good. You're thinking, oh well, okay, so I created this report. No one's really using it. What's the big deal? Well, what's the difference between a report that was never created and a report that was never used? Well, the answer is the project investment to create the report and maintain the infrastructure. And when we're talking about the people in charge of the project dollars, they're going to think about the actual value that this report generated. And you definitely want repeat business and success. So I think if you plan first and ask the right questions and gain some context, you'll be successful. And I think your reports will drive viewers to the action. So how do we drive users to action and understand their motivations? I think that it's important not to rush to create the report, publish it to the entire audience as quickly as possible. I think if you plan first and use mock-up iterations to confirm goals, that's a good first step. I think a better step is to actually start with a basic planning checklist and keep referring back to it. Now, you may not be able to answer all the questions in the beginning of the project because you may annoy the actual project sponsor. But through time and careful open-ended questions, and it may take a wireframe or a couple mock-ups for the real audience and motivations to refine and become clear. Now, all these questions I'm going to kind of talk about in some subsequent slides. So let's talk about exploratory to explanatory. So in the beginning of your project, we focus on understanding the data. What am I looking at? What's in the data source, right? And the exploratory analysis is to understand the data, to figure out what might be noteworthy or interesting to highlight to the audience. So, exploratory analysis is kind of like hunting for the pearls in the oysters. There's a lot of work to find a pearl of wisdom. And as you understand the data better, you will shift towards more of the explanatory analysis. And the explanatory analysis explains why. You're showing the pearls that you found. Now, this is kind of a helpful tip. One of the things you want to do is resist the urge to describe the painstaking analysis and the discovery steps that you went through. Because most of your audience, they'll be interested in your explanatory analysis. So use the data to drive the story to your conclusion. Now, one of the things I want to do is a special kind of like shout out about the different audience types. And one particular audience type in general are the analysts. In general, I've found is that a lot of times they don't believe you. They need to validate the data themselves. So they have to go through some of the exploratory process to some degree. So let them validate the data. As long as it's not super sensitive, why not? But obviously you don't want to field questions, from the audience during perhaps a presentation. That's not very good. So if the data is sensitive, describe the validation process. Now, if you're dealing with executives, they don't have time to review the details. So show them the final analysis summary. They want someone else to validate the data. They want to focus on the final story. So we talked about exploratory and explanatory analysis. So let's talk about understanding your target audience. Does the customer know the use cases and resulting actions based upon the report data? So one of the things you want to make sure is that you don't present to just anyone who's interested in the report or the visualization. You want to make sure that whatever the audience that you're presenting to really understands the use cases and will be driven to action, right? You don't want to be presenting somebody who like a hybrid audience. You need to watch out. It's better to consider creating a whole separate report and presentation for each target audience group. So what if you're not sure who's in the audience, right? Someone just calls a meeting and says, I want you to present on this subject and show these visualizations. My suggestion is, when in doubt, you need to present and create reports for the decision makers. So, are you sure the report requirements are correct? Henry Ford famously said, if I had asked people what they wanted, they would have said they wanted faster horses. And obviously, none of us travels by horse nowadays. So you need to test the stated sponsor report goals ahead of time. So you don't assume that all the project goals are correct. Look for goal confirmation opportunities. Create mock-ups. Watch the user reactions to the mock-ups. What visualization and data values are they drawn to immediately? That should tell you something right there. And project sponsors, sometimes they have a main question in mind, but nothing really beyond that. They're not going to sometimes be even the main users of the reported visualizations. And that's where you come in to assist and guide. Go and ask open-ended questions designed to validate the project parameters, right? Plan for a discovery period. And when possible, avoid the push to create a report with a bunch of visualizations that have little meaning to your audience. So there's always a right time for change. One of the things you need to ask yourself are you creating a new report, or are you modernizing an existing report, like an Excel file that's been published every month, for example? If you're modernizing an existing report, you need to proceed with caution, because sometimes you can come up with several great ideas for improvement that fall on deaf ears, and then you wonder why. The organization actually may rely on a report and have accepted workflows that center around those existing visualizations. You may not even know who created the original report and the initial investment involved. The original creator or sponsor, they might not be even open to improvements. So my suggestion is stop and build trust first. Observe how and when they actually use the report. And I think you'll learn a lot from the user's needs and the current report limitations. And when you feel like you have a winner idea for improvement, ask SMEs for feedback. Sometimes they'll let you know, like, hey, someone's already tried this. You're barking up the wrong tree, right? Wait for the right moment to discuss. Again, you might have the right idea, but just the wrong timing or support. So better to wait for the right opportunities for change. So let's talk about taking your mock-up story for test runs. There's definitely a benefit and a tip that I'd like to share. So why roll the dice to see if you capture the right requirement, design, and story in the final presentation? Obviously, you learn critical mistakes early, and you test your assumptions. You also get to listen for critical feedback, and you can make adjustments. So like, oh, you know what? These people will be in the audience, and they really care about the total profit and sales. Okay, well, I better make sure that's in the actual report. One of the things that you can also do is build anticipation and excitement. Make the test target audience feel like they have input and are actually part of the solution. And what that does is also lowers the change adoption barrier. If you have respected audience members are less likely to be critical if they were actually part of the process and delivery. And hopefully they'll actually take some ownership. So, hey, this is our report. This is our new report. And another helpful tip is make sure your sample data is correct during testing. If your sample data is incorrect, instead of focusing on the big picture, excuse me, your test audience will spend a lot of wasted time discussing or mentally mapping the invalid data. They're not going to focus on anything you're going to say. If you cannot get good data, at least make it super obvious that you're working with abstract ideas and data. So when you're working with different groups, you want to make sure you match your visualization options to the audience. And it's been said that management, they focus on doing things right. However, leadership focuses on the right things. So use your visuals to address the audience's concerns. And if you're dealing with a strategic audience, you want to focus on summary and goal-oriented visuals, not details. So for example, your visualizations might be cards, right? You're going to use proportional types of composition visuals that allow for quick comparisons of progress or market share. You might use bar charts. But keep in mind when the data will be viewed. So usually strategic audience and executives, they're going to view data for longer periods of time. They might be like at the end of the month, end of the quarter, maybe an annual report, right? So make sure that all your default filters and data groupings are valid for those time periods. Execs are thinking, where should I add or remove resources and focus? So you'll need to quickly help drive those actions. Now, on the other hand, operational types of teams and reports, they're very detail oriented. So details are extremely important. So using like a table visual might be useful, right? Also, they're probably asking themselves, well, how are we doing today or this week compared to our goal, right? Are we operating within the desired thresholds? That being said, you can't say that all the visual components are either going to be strategic or operational. Because, for example, an operational report user is still going to appreciate like a radial gauge. So they'll need to show progress towards a goal or target. I think something else that's really important to remember is that everything you render in your report has to be processed mentally. So you need to exclude unnecessary information. Part of achieving clarity is eliminating distractors. So stick to the main message. If something doesn't play a significant role, take it out. It's not needed. And that could include, for example, grid lines, repeating label values, and perhaps even multiple concepts or visualizations within the same chart.
I
What
spend a lot
user
of time telling decision makers that they need to simplify because an executive will say, I want all of my people to know these 20 things. And I have to be, well, your people aren't going to remember 20 things. Can we get down to maybe 6 things or less?
exactly. You're exactly right, Ike. And a lot of times you can actually just a segue is if they you can build the report they asked for and then take it to a target audience member and record them and say, well, what's the first thing that is important to you on this report, and then time it. And sometimes you can take it back to the original sponsor and say, here's what your audience is getting out of the report, and that may actually drive change in the direction you were actually thinking. So what users can see in one glance has everything to do with what they'll do next. So if they're overwhelmed by input or a lack of motivation to process it, their brain will just stop taking it in. Hence the famous acronym, too long, didn't read. So the last slide had two examples of very busy visualizations. But even simple visualizations can create cognitive load. So let's review this slope graph example. Compared to previous visualization examples, this visualization is actually pretty simple. But notice that your eye is bouncing around, trying to read and comprehend everything that's being displayed. You're looking, okay, let's look at the types of information that's being presented. Okay, I got categories, I've got 1, 2, 6 categories, or is it 7? Title, I got years. Your eye is constantly moving around here, right? Just applying a different color to a single category immediately focuses the audience's attention. It's the same data, but now the story is starting to be clear and impactful. So, for example, telling a story based upon a much more clear visualization on the right hand side, the story might sound like this. To our HR audience, all survey categories this year seem to be improving or remaining mostly the same, except for one category, and that's career development. The employees feel like there are significantly fewer career development opportunities compared to last year. Now, what's the big deal? Well, management is concerned star performers will start seeking advancement and the challenges in new or competing organizations. This will cause an increase in recruiting, hiring, and training expenses. Now, to combat this, a new internal job posting website, learning management system, and regular supervisor career guidance meetings should improve these numbers. So in summary, if you take the time to plan a little, to understand the context, identify your target audience and their motivations, use the right visualizations for the right audience, and exclude unnecessary data, lines, or colors that don't drive to the main point, I think you can avoid dead reports and you will have a high value report.
Thank you, Tim. Good references. Yeah, I'll turn my video back on. I appreciate that, Tim. Thanks for doing that. So, like Tim said at the beginning, he focused on those first soft skill areas on making creating a story with data. Later on this year, we were planning on having more topics related to this. I think one time we'll do like choose the correct visual for the right problem. So that will be coming up shortly. If anybody on the call wants to speak to the group and they have a topic that they want to speak to, feel free to email me or Tim. Tim, put your email in the chat so everybody has it. I'll put mine in. You can email one of us and tell us what topic you'd like to speak on. We already have next month's meeting planned. So it will be the same thing. So it'll be the first Wednesday of the month. So it'll be April 6th. And the person that we're going to have speak is actually Melissa Coates. So what was her topic again, Tim? Do you remember?
You know, off the top of my head, I can't
I
remember it.
do. I remember it. Hang on one second. Let me bring it up because we wrote it down on our Google Drive spreadsheet. It was Yep, April 6th. She's going to deliver best practices for delivering and sharing content in Power BI. And it's a 60-minute session next time. She's a Power BI MVP and a conference speaker and book author, and she's really cool. She's really, really nice. I hope you guys are excited to see her next month. So it'll be a little bit of a longer meeting next month. And that's it for today's meeting. If you guys have anything else you guys want to talk about or ask any questions, now's the time. If not, we'll see you guys next month, April 6th, for Melissa Coates' best practices for delivering and sharing content in Power BI. Thanks, guys.
Thank you, Jim. Thank you, Eric.
Yeah, thanks.
Thanks, everybody.